Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily.
Your duty, your constitutional duty, is as jurors to presume Kim Potter innocent. Not guilty, innocent.
The jury deliberates the fate of an ex-Minnesota cop as the trial for Kim Potter is coming to an end. And President Trump files a lawsuit against New York's Attorney General in an attempt to end an investigation into the Trump Organization. Plus, a light at the end of the tunnel as the jury deliberates in the months-long trial of former Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes. Then later, will a jury convict Ghislaine Maxwell on federal sex crimes after she and Jeffrey Epstein allegedly groomed young girls for abuse? Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. And welcome to Law and Crime Daily, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber in for Brian Buckmeyer, joined, of course, with Terry Austin. We are awaiting a verdict in the Kim Potter trial. This is the former officer accused of shooting and killing Daunte Wright during a horrible traffic stop last year. Now, or early this year, I should say. Now, this is a case where the deliberations began on Monday. The jury deliberated for about 5 hours before they were dismissed for the day, and then they reconvened Tuesday morning. Now, Potter faces manslaughter charges stemming from the shooting death of Wright in April. She and an officer in training pulled Wright over for an expired tag. And when they determined that he had a warrant for a weapons charge, they attempted to take him into custody. Body cam footage shows the struggle, and that's when Potter shot him in the chest. Wright's car sped off, and he died as a result of his injuries. Throughout the trial, the jury has heard from several key witnesses. Wright's mother, father, and former girlfriend all took the stand, as well as the officers that Potter worked with that day and the defendant herself. On Monday, we heard closing arguments from the prosecution and the defense. Special Prosecutor Erin Eldridge walked the jury through what happened on April 11th by playing the body cam footage frame by frame, pinpointing moments where Potter used her weapon, saying that the former cop ignored the weight and the color of her firearm. Eldridge told the jury to focus on what this case really is about.
This case is not about Daunte Wright. Daunte Wright is not on trial. He's not the reason we're here today. So whether or not you agree with his decision to flee is not what this case is about. He's not the defendant here. This case is about Kimberly Potter. We're here today because of her conduct, her choices, and her actions. We're here today because she killed Daunte Wright. But this case is also not about the defendant's law-abiding or peaceful nature that you heard about. Members of the jury, good people can commit crimes. Police officers can commit crimes too.
And then from there, the defense took over to finalize their case, refocusing all of the attention and blame on Daunte Wright, saying he is to blame for everything that transpired that day.
The causation was Daunte Wright. When Kim Potter said, taser, 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 that's a signal for the law enforcement officers to take their hands off him, which they did. And then a second later, she shot him, tragically. But she didn't know she had a gun either. And then he said, you shot me. And being alone, what does he do? Does he stay there and say, hey, help me out? He takes off then. And you see the video, he goes like a jet. He drives in danger, he's shot, he drives in danger. He really wanted to get away. And make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen. This is the most important affair of my client's life. 10 years from now, when you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, by golly, I did the right thing when I found Kim Potter not guilty.
All right, so let's break this down. Joining us, of course, Terry Austin and criminal defense attorney Taylor Koss. So let's get right into it. Terry, I got to talk to you about the defense because they're saying that this was a mistake, but that she was justified in shooting Wright nonetheless, even if she didn't know it at the time. Does that defense make sense to you?
It does not. I mean, therein lies the problem with the defense's theory. They're arguing that the use of force was justifiable, whether she had a gun or whether she had a taser. They're saying Potter feared for the lives of the other officers, and they're arguing that that's why she pulled out a weapon. But they can't say it was an accident, too. You can't have it both ways. And if you think about it, when she pulled out that weapon, there's no question that after the fact, she felt as though it was not justified. Just roll the video and it speaks for itself. That was an accident.
Right. Taylor, I'm confused because the prosecution is saying that mistake is not a defense, and that's why you have recklessness and criminal negligence. But are they right? Should the jury not consider mistake as a defense?
So I think, the elements of these crimes are different than the normal crimes that we're used to hearing about. The words we usually hear, the key words are intent, right? Intent, conscious objective, purpose. But here we're really talking about recklessness and negligence. And so I don't think, oops, it was a mistake is a full defense, which is why I think they're trying to bifurcate their defense in two different ways. On one hand, feel
Right.
bad for my client, feel bad for her. She made a mistake. But on the other hand, listen,
Yeah.
understanding she made a mistake, she was justified.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting case. And again, we are awaiting a decision which way or another the jury's going to go. But I want to switch gears right now to the East Coast because police believe the so-called shopping cart killer could be responsible for the murders of more than 4 women in Virginia. 35-year-old Anthony Robinson is in jail accused of murdering 2 women. Now, police in Fairfax County, Virginia, believe he's responsible for the murders of 2 women whose remains were found in Alexandria last week. Charges are also expected in those cases. Police say that Robinson met the 2 women he's charged with killing on a dating site, and surveillance video connected him to the women. Detectives showed a photo of a shopping cart used to wheel one victim to a wooded area.
We need to act right now with our law enforcement partners to figure out who else our killer has had contact with. And what's his MO? Dating sites, motels, blunt force trauma, shopping cart, final resting place. He's killed 4 already, and we suspect that he has more victims.
Now, Robinson has lived in Maryland and New York, and now they're trying to track his history to determine if there are other possible victims. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, we are also waiting for a verdict after weeks long of testimony in the trial of Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes. But first, former President Trump claiming New York's Attorney General abused her position to investigate the Trump Organization. Details on his new lawsuit up next.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
And welcome back to Law and Crime Daily, everybody. Former President Trump has filed a lawsuit against New York's Attorney General, all in an effort to stop an investigation into his company. This week, the Trump Organization, and its namesake sued New York Attorney General Letitia James, asking a federal court to stop her ongoing investigation. This comes as James's office seeks to have the former president sit for a deposition as part of a civil investigation into the Trump Organization. Trump's lawsuit accuses James of misconduct, saying she abused her power to investigate by targeting political rivals. James responded to the lawsuit in a statement saying in part, quote, "Neither Mr. Trump nor the Trump Organization get to dictate if and where they will answer for their actions. Our investigation will continue undeterred because no one is above the law." All right, let's talk about this. So, Terry, over to you. Former President Trump calling the investigation unconstitutional, a violation of his rights. Does this have teeth?
Actually, Jesse, I do think it has some teeth. I mean, the question is whether or not he's got enough evidence to prove it. He's trying to argue that she violated his rights by pursuing this investigation. It's an abuse of her power. She's just trying to advance her career. And, you know, basically he's saying that she's going after him and she has no right to go after him. But I do think she has plenty of evidence to show that, you know, he has been breaking the law. And the only thing I would advise her, he is claiming that she's speaking publicly. And I do think whether you're, you know, a state attorney general or U.S. attorney general, that's one thing you should probably try to avoid, speaking on talk shows.
Well, Taylor, is there a conflict here? Is there a conflict that there's the James Silva probe and then an ongoing criminal investigation by the Manhattan DA's office that's happening simultaneously?
So I don't think there's a conflict of interest. In fact, oftentimes, as I know they're doing in this case, the two agencies work together. In fact, my understanding is that several members of the state attorney general's office are actually transferred over, so to speak, to the DA's office now to cooperate, share information, and help work on the criminal side. So I don't think there's a conflict of interest on that end. The one thing I would say is it's interesting here that Trump shares an interesting bedfellow here because Andrew Cuomo also made these allegations against the sitting state attorney general. So very rarely do you see Cuomo and Trump on the same side, but you do in this case.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if former President Trump wants to be compared to Andrew Cuomo, but that's a separate conversation for a separate time. But yeah, it makes interesting bedfellows nonetheless. Let's switch over now to Georgia, and we focus on the three men who were convicted of killing Ahmaud Arbery because now they face an upcoming federal hate crimes trial, and the judge in that case is actually extending the area where potential jurors might be selected from. So as you know, that Travis McMichael, William Roddy Bryan, and Gregory McMichael were convicted November 24th for hunting down and shooting unarmed black jogger Ahmaud Arbery in 2020. The three were all found guilty of felony murder, among other charges. Each of the men faced life in prison for those charges. A sentencing hearing is set for January 7th. About a month later, a federal trial is scheduled to begin, and it is going to focus on potential hate crimes in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. New evidence is expected in that trial, including Facebook posts and videos that have never been seen before. At a short hearing Monday, federal judge Lisa Godby Wood said that around 1,000 people from across 43 counties will be summoned as potential jurors. And that trial is set to start February 7th. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a former CEO waits to learn what her fate will be by a jury. I'm talking, of course, about the trial of Elizabeth Holmes and the federal fraud charges that she ultimately faces. But first, and up next, a jury is working to make a decision on whether Ghislaine Maxwell is guilty of sex crimes. We're on verdict watch in her federal trial. Welcome back, everybody. The autopsy of a former NFL player is revealing more about his death while in police custody, and this independent examination is revealing evidence of strangulation. Former New Orleans Saints defensive lineman Glenn Foster Jr. died December 6 while in police custody in Alabama. 2 days later, Foster was arrested for a speeding violation. He was released December 5th, but later rebooked minutes later on other charges. Foster was found unresponsive in the back of a police car after arriving at a hospital and then died the next day. A statement from the family's attorney reads in part, quote, "Keeping people in your custody alive is literally the lowest bar we can set for a law enforcement agency." Foster played with the Saints in the 2013 and 2014 season. And we're on verdict watch in the case of former Silicon Valley CEO and businesswoman Elizabeth Holmes. Last week, jurors heard closing arguments from both sides. The prosecution argued that Holmes had the chance to be honest about her company's blood testing, but say she chose to defraud investors. The defense countered, saying the government's case didn't give the full story. They said there were some, quote, missing witnesses and that the case was more complicated than the prosecution said. Holmes' defense team doubled down on their argument that she did not intend to defraud investors. Holmes faces 11 counts of felony fraud and conspiracy for allegedly ripping off investors and potentially endangering the lives of patients. Holmes' company, Theranos, was once touted as a company that would revolutionize blood testing, but later tests found that many issues with the company's technology. If convicted, Holmes could face 20 years in prison and a fine of $250,000 plus restitution. So, Terry, let me start with you. How do you think her taking the stand, which she did in this case, is going to affect the jury's deliberation?
I actually think it helped her case. I think jurors always want to see what does the defendant have to say. And usually you don't want to put them on, but she's very charming. It's how she was able to actually convince all of these high-powered investors to invest in her company. And based on reports, it does seem as though she held up fairly well on cross-examination. I just think she shouldn't have pointed the finger at Sunny Balwani because it did make it seem like she was reaching for straws. But other than that, I think it probably helped her case.
The COO and a person she had a relationship with. Taylor, what is the legal line there between making bad business decisions and fraud?
So it really comes down to your actions. You know, there are mistakes and there are bad business judgments, and then there are intentional acts that someone undertakes to defraud investors. So, for instance, her defense attorneys say that wasn't her intent, and yet, how do you explain, for instance, her placing a Pfizer logo on top of a report that Pfizer had nothing to do with to appear that it had the imprimatur of their approval? So those are the difficult things that she needs to explain away in order for the jury to go in her direction.
Complicated defendant, complicated case. We'll wait and see what the jury decides. When we come back, we are awaiting a verdict. This is as the jury deliberates the fate of Ghislaine Maxwell in her federal sex trafficking trial in New York. And welcome back, everybody. We head over to New York now, where the jury has wrapped up its first full day of deliberations in the Ghislaine Maxwell sex crimes trial. 59-year-old Maxwell, a British socialite and former companion of Jeffrey Epstein, faces 6 felony sex crime charges. Prosecutors say she recruited and groomed young teenage girls for Epstein for sexual abuse. If convicted on all 6 counts, Maxwell faces up to 70 years in prison. Epstein faced similar charges in 2019, but he was found dead by suicide in his jail cell before his case went to trial. Jurors met for a short time Monday to begin deliberations, and they came back together once again Tuesday morning. Now, Law&Crime's Adam Glassfield has been following this case closely and was actually in that courthouse. We caught up with him to learn what is the latest and what is happening in this case.
Well, this is the first full day of deliberations, and on the first full day of deliberations, we have finally gotten a jury note requesting evidence, and they are keeping busy. They have requested essentially transcripts of testimony of all 3 of Ghislaine Maxwell's alleged victims. Now, there are 4 accusing witnesses. One of them is not counted among the alleged victims. They didn't request her transcript because it probably won't move the needle on the charges one way or another. It was meant to essentially bolster what prosecutors describe as a pattern. The most significant thing about the request to me was what they asked for and what they didn't ask for. They didn't ask for one of the accusing witnesses who testified under the pseudonym Kate, because the judge instructed them, because she was over the age of consent at the time, she is not an alleged victim of the crimes charged. So it looks like they are really getting their hands dirty. They are really engaging with the evidence that they saw at trial.
Now, it should be noted that the jury was instructed on whether or not Maxwell was willfully blind to what was going on and if she was really Epstein's number 2, as a lot of witnesses have testified. So let's break it down. Now, Terry, here's what's interesting. If the jury doesn't believe one of the accusers, does that mean that they don't believe all of the accusers? After all, they wanted the readback of several of the accusers, the women who spoke out.
Well, that's a distinct possibility. Sometimes jurors do look at all of them as if they were the same, and if he or she did something against one victim, he or she did something against all of them or none of them. But I think we have seen in the past jurors who do try to look at these survivors separately, and they try to gauge the credibility of each witness for themselves. And so we've seen that in the past. Say, for instance, in the Weinstein case, we know that some of those victims did get the guilty against Weinstein and others got not guilty against him. So we know it's happened. And Jesse, you and I covered the Kellen Winslow case. We know that in that case, it was also split. So hopefully the jury is looking at each of these victims separately and judging them based on their credibility and based on their facts.
Taylor, I have to ask you, the prosecution promised a certain kind of case, and we actually thought this trial was going to be much longer than it was. Do you think the prosecution put forward in the end as strong as a case as they ultimately promised?
I think that's, being a former prosecutor, that is one of the biggest mistakes you can make. And one of the biggest mistakes you can make is promise something you can't deliver. And by promising a large production, listen, the jury's listening. That's what they expect. So the question here is did they meet the bar? Did they decide part of the way through the trial that, wait, we don't need all the witnesses we thought we did. Everything's going great in our way. The problem is they have to communicate that in their summation and closing arguments to the jury. And if you're the defense side, you get right up there and say, remember all those promises they made you? Well, they didn't keep half of them. How can you find my client guilty under those circumstances?
Yeah, and Terry, we have about 20 seconds. Again, the idea that these women are lying about her, what would be the incentive?
There would be no incentive. And the biggest issue to me, Jesse, in this case is why would Maxwell help these individuals to travel to be in certain places without their parents? Just that alone to me. And we do know that conspiracy to travel with these individuals is part of the claim. So I definitely think that these witnesses are credible, and Ghislaine Maxwell shouldn't have been involved in this at all.
Well, she said she didn't need to testify because she felt the prosecution hasn't met their burden. Terry, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody out there, for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.